we have a list of presentations that were very specially put together, trying to think about what is important for us, and also acknowledging in all of the Celebrating Women events that we've had, the things that you have said to us are of interest to you. And so we begin today with Dr. Ann Murphy.
Well, I always wince when someone says I'm an expert in something, because what I really like to think of myself as is a generalist. I practice general internal medicine, a lot of training in adult medicine, but by having been the third woman ever because I am the third woman in Missoula to ever have done pap smears, I have 23 years of treating women by virtue of how my practice grew. But in any case, I hesitated to give this talk this morning, even though I think it's a really interesting area, because there's a tremendous amount of both information and misinformation over the last 10 years that's been put out in the media and lots of other sources. So in trying to find a focus, I decided to just focus on my experience of the last 23 years practicing. A lot of my, quote, expertise is really on-the-job training. First, I'd like to just say a few words about definitions of menopause. The word menopause truly means the period of time after which a woman is completely done with periods. Obviously, that's a definition that is only known in retrospect. You don't know when your last period is going to be ahead of time. The menopause is actually a time of fewer symptoms than is the perimenopause, which is what most people think of as menopause. Perimenopause is the period of time during which time the ovaries are sometimes functioning normally and sometimes losing estrogen function. It commonly occurs 3 to 7 years before the last period. The average perimenopausal woman is 47, but the normal range is enormous, anywhere between 40 and 55. So it's pretty common for women in their 40s to be experiencing, quote, menopausal symptoms. So the perimenopause is really the symptomatic period, and the menopause is the time after which actually symptoms often become much less noticeable. Because the perimenopause is a time when ovaries are notoriously variable in their production of estradiol, which is the main female hormone, it is a period, again, where things are most symptomatic. And the challenges and issues of the perimenopause, therefore, are somewhat different than that of the menopause. And I'll try and touch a little bit on both. I'm going to go ahead and just read you my take-home messages today, so if you guys got to get up and go to the bathroom, this is the important part. With a little common sense and guidance, you really aren't going to do this wrong. One of the reasons I came up with the title, Demystifying Menopause, is that I get a lot of questions about, based on the latest article in the media, well, they said estrogen's good, and then they said estrogen wasn't, and then, and it's very, very confusing if you're just trying to figure it out. But really, it's not all that confusing. There are some choices to be made, and I think that with a little common sense and a little guidance, you're not going to make the wrong choices. Seeing your physician or nurse practitioner once a year during this time, I think, is a good idea to help you make choices, to help get that guidance. The choice should be informed by symptoms, your own personal history, your family's history, and where you are in the transition. Number 3, reevaluate those choices every year in light of how you're doing and feeling, and also in light of any new information that may have become available. Number 4, take internet and stories, friends' experiences, and news reports with a grain of salt, as they may or may not apply to you, and they are often not accurate and sometimes not helpful. And finally, be aware that the marketing of menopause is a huge industry, and not just from with the traditional pharmaceutical industry, but the natural herbal industry is also hugely into this. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. They have something to gain from selling you their products. And finally, natural does not necessarily mean safe or effective. And synthetic can often be the most effective and the safest choice by virtue of the number of times things have been studied. So a few words about the perimenopause. It's a period of time when estradiol secretions from the ovaries is highly variable from 1 month to the next. And therefore, it's a time when symptoms are at their worst. Typically hot flashes, night sweats, I'm sure none of this is new to many of you, mood changes, cognitive changes, as well as changes in libido. Can all be quite disruptive in the perimenopause. Because of the month-to-month variability in the hormone levels, measuring levels in the blood or saliva at this stage is actually clinically problematic, because if you're measuring one at one time and then you're prescribing based on the measuring of those hormones, in 3 months that may be completely different. And so it's trying to hit a moving target. Consequently, what most of us do is rely on symptoms and reevaluate every 6 months to 12 months. The good news is that most of the symptoms of the perimenopause really are treatable, sometimes with hormone replacement, but often with other non-hormonal treatments as well. In recent years, as non-prescription treatments have become widely advertised and utilized, many women I see have already tried several, and that's usually where our conversation begins. There are a ton of hormone options out there, and I've used them all. My therapeutic biases about what is best includes what the cost of them are, of each of them, individual preference of the woman. But my therapeutic mantra is that the proof is in the individual pudding. To say that one hormone is safe, is the best, safest, or most effective is really just not supported by the scientific literature or by my clinical experience. Having said that, the longer I've practiced, the more open I've become to the notion that different things can be more helpful to different individual women. One of the things that I often say now about any medication class is that, for instance, even just blood pressure medication, if in 50 years, and it may be more like 100, the way medical science promises, and then they don't quite deliver quite when they say they're going to, but if we could measure individual DNA level or DNA in each person, we could probably pick an individual drug within any class of drug that would work best for them. That may well be true in menopause as well as other biological phenomenon. In any case, we're not there. So therapeutically with medication, it's always trial and error. It is important to recognize that for some women, hormones don't work for many of the symptoms of the perimenopause, or if they do work, it's a very modest improvement. These are examples of and generalizations, which is that in my experience, antidepressants often work much better than hormones for many of the cognitive and mood changes of this time of life, even though that's not a very popular thing to say these days. Women with a history of migraine or a family history of breast cancer should really think twice before taking any therapeutic hormone. Meds for sleep often work well for insomnia if hormones are inadequate, which I would say is about 50% of the time, because the sleep disorder is definitely maybe stimulated by the hormonal changes, but replacing those hormones are not necessarily always completely effective. With sleep medications, they don't have to be used forever. There are many options in sleep medications, and many of them are not addictive or you don't have to develop tolerance, which means they stop working. With regard to over-the-counter options, for hot flashes, soy really doesn't work. I know lots and lots of women are using soy, but in study after study, they've not been able to show that soy makes any difference beyond placebo. Progesterone cream and black cohosh have been demonstrated to work better than placebo. Hormones work better than any of those. For mood, St. John's wort and valerian can be helpful, but they're not very potent. And again, in my experience, antidepressants work better if the symptoms are really significant and disruptive. For memory, ginkgo can help some, but again, the memory loss in associated with perimenopause or menopause, one important thing, it is not Alzheimer's. It is not an irreversible memory loss. And I get that. I mean, that's a huge fear that a lot of women come in with. It is reversible. It has a lot of, anyway, antidepressants often work best for that, but hormones can also be helpful. It really depends on the person, and you can do things sequentially in terms of what women prefer to start with. A lot of that memory stuff is stress related. And the stress, what happens with memory at menopause is definitely contributed by the hormonal fluctuations, contributed to by the sleep disruption, but also contributed to by stress, which is a common feature of that time of life. Finally, the menopause. It's a period of time after a woman's last period, and it's also called the postmenopausal time. The symptoms continue for some women, but they're usually milder, in particular hot flashes. But the symptom that is more common at this stage is vaginal dryness. Vaginal dryness and difficulty with intercourse is very, very treatable with a variety of topical products. Those topical products do not expose women to the long-term problems of estrogen replacement therapy. The history of estrogen replacement therapy in this country is pretty interesting. It was promoted initially in the 60s as a miracle drug that would help women stay young and sexual, and then it was panned in the 80s as a cause of uterine and breast cancer. In the 90s, there was resurgent interest in it as a preventer of heart disease, and most recently, there's the Women's Health Initiative. Women's Health Initiative, by virtue of its study design, large numbers, placebo-controlled and blinded, is going to be the best information we have about long-term estrogen replacement therapy for the rest of all of our lives in this room. There is not going to be another study that probably affects our decisions within our lifetime, because this one took 10 to 15 years to complete, and it's the best we have. It's not perfect, but it's the best we have as far as medical information. It also was unbiased because it was not sponsored by drug companies, which many of the studies are. So it's really become the gold standard of information. As far as what it showed, and again, first, this only applies to women who were naturally postmenopausal, not to women who had their ovaries removed with a hysterectomy in their 30s or 40s. Secondly, it really only speaks to long-term use of estrogen, meaning 3 years or more after the natural menopause. And third, there were some surprises. There were two hormones studied. One was Prem-Pro, that's the trade name, and the other was Premarin. Prem-Pro was used in women who still had uteruses, who hadn't had hysterectomies. The Premarin was used in women who had already had a hysterectomy. If the women who took both estrogen and progesterone, i.e. Prem-Pro, did have a slight increased risk of breast cancer, heart attack, and stroke. Estrogen alone, however, without the progesterone, there still remained a slight increased incidence of stroke, but not of breast cancer or heart attack. The finding of an increased risk of heart attack and stroke really blew away the medical community, because all of the data, lots of data prior to that, suggested that it was helpful for heart disease. In fact, a lot of women got put on estrogen who had a high risk of heart disease. Now, there's still a lot of debate about the timing of estrogen use, and that most of us, will still use it short term, and it may still be helpful in some women as far as heart disease risk, but it's clear now that for continued use for 3 to 5 or more years after menopause, it does not help heart disease. It does not help lower the incidence of heart disease. Big one, no benefit to dementia prevention. The OB/GYN community was pushing this big time to say, oh yeah, you can prevent dementia. It didn't do it. And there's basically, I think that's been put to rest. There's definite benefit for osteoporosis prevention. There's no doubt about that. though the Women's Health Initiative only studied 2 commercially available products, it's important, I think, to not assume that all other products are safe. And I have a lot of women coming in assuming that their bioidentical hormones or other hormones that they're taking are safe. There's no reason to assume that. In fact, I think you have to assume that the data from the Women's Health Initiative applies to any therapeutic levels of hormones, including bioidentical, including topical estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, which isn't saying that they are unsafe. It's to say they're unstudied, and given that the best information we have is that how the body treats those bioidentical hormones is the same way the body treats Prempro, I really think you have to start with the assumption that the benefit risks are the same as they are for Premarin and progesterone, or Premarin and Provera. So does that mean that women should not take estrogen or progesterone long-term after menopause? I don't think so. And this is where the individual assessment of health risk is so important, as well as how symptomatic someone is. I believe that some women are best off taking long-term estrogen replacement, and some clearly are not. Whatever course you take, though, it's really important, as I mentioned earlier, that choice be monitored on a year-to-year basis with things such as bone density checks, lipid and heart checks, and of course regular mammography. There is no one right or wrong answer to this question, and a woman's choices may reasonably change from year to year based on changing circumstances in her own life or that in the life of her family. For instance, if her sister develops breast cancer and she's 5 years into taking estrogen, I think she should rethink whether or not she should continue that. Finally, I'd like to make a few observations. The menopausal years, speaking from experience and the experience of other women, can be wonderful and filled with possibility, not just hot flashes. Margaret Mead, the famous anthropologist who did most of her important work in her 50s and 60s after her divorce and the death of a closest colleague. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and our own Jeanette Rankin both continued their social justice work well into their 80s. Some of us in the menopausal years have more financial and time resources than we once did. Many of us have more emotional resilience and patience than we did in our youth. I believe that women and the women's experience are essential to human progress. It is women who create and support families and community. It is women who are steadfast in our opposition to war and violence. In the postmenopausal years, we get to be grandmothers and grand aunties, which I hear is a lot more fun and gratifying than being a mom, although that's pretty great itself. Elizabeth Cady Stanton had a great thing to say about menopause and aging, and I'll close with her quote. The heyday of a woman's life is the shady side of 50, when the vital forces heretofore expended in other ways are garnered in the brain, when their thoughts and sentiments flow out in broader channels, when philanthropy takes the place of family selfishness, and when from the depths of poverty and suffering the wail of humanity grows as pathetic to their ears as once was the cry of their own children. So hot flashes and vaginal dryness are the easy stuff to help. Let's get it done and move on to supporting each other, our families, and our communities. Any comments or questions?
So nature intends for our bodies to change over time, and so I wonder with hormone replacement whether you're just delaying a natural change that needs to happen, and would you say that you would give hormone replacement or give hormones to women who just have symptoms that they can't deal with?
As far as our nature intends, you have to look at that from certain perspectives, or you can look at it from a lot of different perspectives. One perspective is in 1900, the average woman did not live beyond 55 to experience osteoporosis, heart disease, et cetera, et cetera. People died differently. So what is natural in 2000 is very different than what was, quote, natural in 1900. So I'm not sure that I necessarily buy the notion that nature intended anything. Nature and our experience in it is continuing to evolve. As far as, I would say since the onset of the Women's Health Initiative, that most women choose, that there has been a big shift, that in the women I see and the choices they're making, that many are choosing not to do estrogen replacement if they can approach it in other ways. So for instance, for osteoporosis prevention, diet, adequate calcium, exercise are critical. Adding a few weights to an exercise regimen can make a big difference in how fast a woman loses bone. But the problem is that if a woman comes in and she's 50 or 55 and her mom lived to be 95, I can guarantee if she doesn't do anything that she will develop osteoporosis. Now, developing osteoporosis and having that impact the life are two different things, and you have to look at fall prevention and exercise. Again, exercise. I mean, and I don't mean marathon running or anything intense. I'm just talking about staying moving. Makes a big difference. So I think I understand what you're saying, but when people come in, I think that the symptomatic period of time, it's fine to use estrogen, and a lot of women choose to do that with the notion that eventually they won't. And a lot of it comes down to if you're not sleeping and you're getting depressed and you're not functioning well at work, that should be a transitional time. It shouldn't last forever. So if you can help people using hormones or other things in that time, I think it's very safe and it makes a lot of sense. What the media says when they put something is that, estrogen causes breast cancer. Well, estrogen doesn't cause breast cancer. Estrogen is a factor in when breast it's one factor in when breast cancer occurs. So what this does is it shows you what is the additional risk of taking estrogen for more than 3 years after menopause for breast cancer. And for estrogen alone, without the progesterone, there is no increased risk. And that was also a big surprise. The benzodiazepines, which are the classic sleep medication, also are really helpful for short-term use. And all of the new ones that are being advertised are not necessarily any better than the old ones. It's just the drug companies they're hugely expensive, and the drug companies make a lot more profit on them.
Dr. Murphy, thank you very, very much for sharing the morning with us. We are very, very blessed to have a woman of Dr. Murphy's expertise and knowledge available for us in this community. I would like to introduce Peg Shea. Peg is the Executive Director of the Montana Meth Project.
Good morning. I'm going to spend a quick 20-25 minutes giving you a lot of information that I usually do in an hour and a half, so put your thinking cap on. First, I want to just talk about drug abuse and risk factors. We need to always keep this in mind, that when you think about drug abuse and the risk factors, we really need to think about our community, our peer cluster, which is very important, particularly amongst teens and women, the impact our family has on us genetically, socially, psychologically, and then the individual makeup. Drug abuse is complex, and it causes a lot of side symptoms, if you will, particularly again in teens, delinquency, juvenile depression, unwanted pregnancy, etc. So as I talk about methamphetamine, I want you to really consider and always keep in mind our genetics and our environment and the interplay it has with one another as women develop addiction to methamphetamine. So what is methamphetamine? It's a powerful central nervous system stimulant that strongly activates multiple systems in the brain. It's manufactured, which means it's not natural in nature. And that's a very important aspect of methamphetamine. It's closely related to amphetamine, which perhaps some of you know as White Cross or speed, etc. But it's different because of a particular molecule that they remove from pseudoephedrine in order to get methamphetamine. The process of synthetically producing methamphetamine in and of itself is horrible, and that is that the synthetic drug pseudoephedrine, basically the process is when that is manufactured, you need to take away from it all the different parts that make that particular medication using a variety of different household chemicals, and which basically extracts a molecule called oxygen, and then you get methamphetamine. And it's a little complex, and I could literally spend 30 minutes talking to you about the process of making methamphetamine, but we don't have that kind of time. What's most important is to understand it's a stimulant. What does meth look like? This is what it looks like. And it varies depending upon the process the producer uses to get to the final product called methamphetamine. In Missoula, particularly since we've changed our laws in our state regarding accessing Sudafed and the precursor medication to methamphetamine, we've seen a lot of crystal meth come into our community, primarily through large production labs in Mexico, up through the Quad Cities and then over into Montana, hitting actually Missoula as one of the first sites because of our access to the interstate. This is a woman who is a meth addict. I only have two ugly pictures, but just to let you to see, this is a live, very live person still. Who, what happens here is, and if you think about what an amphetamine is, or methamphetamine in particular, one of the phenomenons that happen is that you start feeling what's called meth bugs underneath your arms, and you literally believe that there's something crawling there, so they start picking at it. And also, meth is used frequently, particularly by women, by the way, in an IV way. So you already have sores, perhaps, from using needles, then you have that sensation of meth bugs, and then you start picking at it. And so our ads in and of themselves are pretty ugly things, but they're really based on facts and the process of addiction to meth. This is what, this is a meth mouth. This is what happens to women and all people when they use methamphetamine. The theory is that amphetamine and methamphetamine really dries up your saliva in your mouth, so you don't have that natural process going on in cleaning your mouth. And you probably don't necessarily take real good care of yourself as you stay up for days at a time in the use of meth, and then you crash. So you're not drinking and properly, or eating properly, or doing proper health care and hygiene. This is a woman that perhaps you've seen if you've researched anything about meth. This was literally three years and 5 months later. This was on her left side. This was her first arrest. And on the right side is what she came into, actually, in the Portland Law Enforcement Agency 3 years into heavy use. So it also has major psychiatric consequences because of the impact it has on the brain that I'll just talk about briefly. There's paranoid reactions, there's memory impairment, there's a lot of depression, there's hallucinations, there's psychotic reactions, panic disorders, and really a rapid addiction to it. The reason I can't necessarily talk a lot about women in meth is that it's not been researched much. Surprise, surprise. And actually, methamphetamine in and of itself hasn't been researched much. One of the best pieces of information that we have is actually from 2004. In which they looked specifically at methamphetamine users and some of the characteristics of them. The one that I want to talk about today is really the reasons for using meth based on, this was a study of about 100 women, and as they looked at their process and addiction, and the reason is, it seems obvious, but 56% wanted to get high. They wanted to feel different. They wanted a change in their life emotionally. They wanted more energy. We're finding that for women in particular, that it's not necessarily just the low-income single-parent mom who's being addicted to methamphetamine. It's also women who are doing multiple job tasks, taking care of their family, perhaps working, don't have a lot of time, need more energy. I know in my house, excuse me if I move here, I've not heard that well, for house cleaning and shopping and laundry and taking care of the kids and figuring out how to pay the bills, etc. So 37% of the women identified needing more energy, which is why they used meth. The other is to deal with a mood disorder. They wanted to feel better. They were depressed. Perhaps they were already having sleeping problems. So they wanted to literally, very consciously wanted to change their mood. Again, for women, particularly young girls, we're finding that they want to lose weight. As I don't need to tell anyone in this room the pressure we all have as women about our body image. They also wanted to feel more attractive. Again, some of the women in the study wanted to party, meaning they wanted to have fun. They wanted to escape their situation, and they wanted to enhance their sexual pleasure. Now, this differs pretty significantly for men, by the way. The sexual pleasure enhancement for men is the third reason that men use methamphetamine, not the last. I'm going to talk a little bit about the brain and meth because it's relevant. I want you to think about our natural reward systems, those things that we absolutely need: food, water, sex, and nurturing. We know one thing about all drugs, that they enhance the dopamine pleasure pathway, which is in your brain. There's a study that was done at UCLA looking at those natural reward systems. And what they did basically is they deprived rats of food, and that's your slide there on your left. And what they found is the basal output, meaning without food, their dopamine output was relatively low. At the point 60 minutes into not having food, what they found is when they gave the rat food, their dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter in the brain, zoomed up to an output of 150. So this is a rat that was starved and ate, went to 150. Similarly with sex. So they basically did not let rats have sex for an amount of time. They allowed that to happen, and they found a rise of dopamine output to 200. Methamphetamine. They did exactly the same thing. They didn't have a rat have methamphetamine. They gave them methamphetamine, and that same output went to 1,500 units. So that means that the rush in the brain of using methamphetamine goes from 0 to 1,500 compared to 0 to 200 when you're starved and you are fed, or when you don't have sex and you have sex. So what happens is methamphetamine basically is a process of mimicking and overloading your brain with the neurotransmitter dopamine. And what that means is, I want you all to think about a moment here in the last week or two in which you felt fantastic, or you felt great, or you felt proud of your son or daughter, or you felt pleased with the way your day went, or you got a piece of news that made you feel fantastic, or you just finally went to that exercise class and afterwards you felt fantastic, or you had a great meal, or you had a great evening with your partner. Imagine how wonderful that felt. Now multiply it by 100 times, and that's how it feels to use methamphetamine. So what happens is, because of that mimicking of the neurotransmitter dopamine, which is what makes you feel good in your brain, the first use oftentimes of methamphetamine is so powerful. The individual feels beautiful, energized, lovely, loving, powerful, in control, wide awake, clear. That's such a powerful emotion that many individuals will seek that feeling and emotion again. And that's sort of the process of being driven into using methamphetamine, not just once, but multiple times. Similarly, meth is a stimulant, and we know it's also a neurotoxin. Cocaine's a stimulant, but it's not a neurotoxin. So meth often tends to be more severe and persistent in their addiction. So it's a longer acting drug than cocaine, it's more severe than cocaine, and it's a neurotoxin. What we know when somebody engages in neurotoxicity, we have some cognition problems. And the reason this is relevant is, if you think about an individual woman who may be seeking methamphetamine to deal with a problem or help lose weight or help get more energy, what they don't understand is the drug and the impact it has on her brain. And soon in this process of then feeling wonderful and then searching and finding it again, soon it becomes a neurotoxin to the brain, and then their thinking gets screwed up, if you you will. They have problems manipulating information. They get lost in understanding what's happening to them. They have problems organizing information and following through on tasks. They have cognitive impairment. What we're finding for meth addicts is actually their brain looks very much like a traumatic brain injury. So this is why we need prevention. And the Montana Meth Project is solely focused on prevention. So some quick facts about meth and Montana women. First, the addiction treatment rates for women increased over 50% in the past 2 years, which means that 50% more women are coming into treatment for meth addiction in 2004 than there were in 2002. This is how old this data is. So that's sort of good news in the sense they're coming into treatment, but it's bad news also in the sense that perhaps for the very first time in my career of 30 years, meth is an equal opportunity drug. Typically in treatment, we see about 20% of the individuals there are women, for alcohol, marijuana, etc., for a variety of reasons, but they tend to be underrepresented in treatment. For methamphetamine, when we looked at our state admission profile, about 45% of women were there due to methamphetamine, and about 55% of men were there due to methamphetamine. So we know actually that women are using meth almost at an equal rate as men, particularly for our young girls. We also know that about 85% of our women, and this was about 2 years ago, in our state prison report they had a recent history of meth usage. So quickly in the process of meth addiction, you get involved in illegal behavior because you need to find money or you need to find that drug, and you engage in behaviors that end up putting you in front of law enforcement and in the correctional system. More recently, just for your information, 52%, this is data that, what is this? This is September, that I found, I believe, in May of this year. About 52% of our children in our foster care in Montana right now are there due to meth problems with their parents, and primarily women. So the Montana Meth Project is a large-scale experiment in prevention. The reason that it's useful to think about, the drug is available. As a matter of fact, when we did our survey in July of 2005, let me just give you some quick information. 41% of our Montana kids, teenagers, 12 to 17, 41% said that methamphetamine is easy to get. In fact, it's as easy to get as alcohol and marijuana. That jumps to about 57% of our 18 to 24-year-old kids. I consider them kids. Are there anybody under 24 here? Some, maybe. 17% of Montana kids, again, ages 12 to 17, 17% reported that they had a close friend who used meth in the past year. That jumps up to about 24% if you add 18 to 24-years. 14% of the 12 to 17-year-olds and 33% of our young adults reported that they had been offered methamphetamine in the past year. I think the even more startling for me was, in that survey, 25% of our kids age 12 to 24 did not believe that there was any risk in using methamphetamine even once. So what that told us is that our kids, and I would suggest most of us in the room, really didn't have a lot of information about methamphetamine. We really didn't understand what that drug was. And what I saw in treatment was that we were seeing 15-20% of our adult population coming in with meth problems, and then all of a sudden that started to rise. We were seeing a stabilization, if you will, in our adolescent program here in Missoula, about 10 or 12% of the kids coming in. Within 1 year's time, we were seeing about 45% of the kids who were in our treatment doors reported that they had used meth in 1 year's time. So what that meant is that the group of people, the distributors of methamphetamine, found the way into our world of kids, meaning they found a place to start distributing it, perhaps not at school, but close by. They found out where kids hang out on Friday night and Saturday, etc. So they basically got methamphetamine in front of our kids. And as you can see, this drug is so pervasively addictive, and it makes you feel so wonderful initially that you're driven to seek that drug again. again. And soon you get lost in the nature of the drug, that for kids in particular who are highly addictive anyway, biologically or neurologically, there's so much at risk for addiction. Methamphetamine in kids, you put them together and we've got a problem. We've got a significant problem, and it happens very, very quickly and very rapidly. So we decided that what we really needed to do is educate our state, educate our kids, our adults, our parents about methamphetamine. And yes, we used one hell of a method to do it. But what we found when we interviewed kids is that they said to us, health class, the volume goes down. So if we have an adult standing in front of us telling us what to do, we don't listen. And if there's really a problem with methamphetamine, we'd like to hear from other kids across the state, which is where the radio ads came from. They're very real, live Montana kids talking to other Montanan kids about meth addiction. And thirdly, if you're going to do a television campaign, you have to get our attention, because we know we're a savvy group of kids. They've been raised more than any of us on a media world, and so you have to get our attention. So if you think about it, you have 30 seconds to get a young person's attention. So you have to be rather bold, if you will. And so that's where the ads came from. And we'll continue using kids' feedback about our ad campaign, about what it is we can do for them, basically to raise their awareness about the meth addiction. And I would suggest that we are impacting 10-year-olds to 80-year-olds in the state of Montana. In fact, I hate to tell you this, but my son just said this to me a couple of days ago, and I'm not sure why. He said, Mom, it wasn't until you started doing this ad campaign that you ever talked to me about methamphetamine. And you know what? He was right. Here I am, an addiction professional, 28 years in the field, and I hadn't talked to my 13-year-old about meth. Why? Because I didn't want to believe it was going to be a problem. I didn't want to think that he was going to be an alcohol and drug user, number one. 2, that he would ever be in a place that might be a problem. And 3, that meth was available to our teenagers. So I was in denial, I have to admit it. But I'm not anymore, and as I'm sure none of you are. As you perhaps have experienced, we have in my family. I'm driving my son to school, the radio commercial comes on. It was one of the girls from wherever, or one of the boys on the radio. And that moment's a teachable moment. Because my son will say, "Is that real?" And I'll say, "Yes." He says, "Well, how does that happen?" And we talk about it. And I've heard from all across the state that that's what's going on for parents and kids. We did a survey in July of 2005. We resurveyed in March of 2006. And we are moving the needle a bit about perception of risks that kids have and increasing their knowledge of meth. And perception of benefit. So we basically saw in these particular areas significant changes from 05 to 06 in how kids see methamphetamine. Similarly, and equally, if not more importantly, particularly for girls, their perception of benefit of using also decreased. So you would see it this way. In September of 2005, 73% of the kids thought meth did not make you popular. In April of 2006, 87% of the kids believed that meth did not make you popular. So those are good things. Again, we moved the needle very specifically on areas that we targeted in our ad campaign. We did not move the needle on other areas we did not target. So we've got work to do. But we're pleased with some of the shifts here. So for an example, in September 2005, 45% of the kids believed that meth did make you happy. That moved to 59% believed that meth in and of itself would not necessarily make you happy. So those are the kinds of shifts that we need to continue changing. The other is our parent-child discussion. I knew that this would be true as I traveled across the state. It greatly increased, particularly due to our ad campaign. So we saw a 44% increase in parent-child discussion, according to teens, which is important, between point in those 6 months. What we also saw was that parents reported that primarily their parent-child discussion about meth increased due to the television ads. So we continue doing our campaign. We'll continue doing our campaign. Kids across the state have been very supportive of our campaign. We've got, I've got probably a couple hundred kids who are volunteers in different communities who are doing all kinds of different activities for us. We've got, similarly, another 150 adults across the state who are doing volunteer work for us in a variety of different ways, primarily presenting the Montana Meth Project initiative and point. Yes?
How does the treatment program work?
Well, for one, there isn't necessarily a specialized treatment program for women and meth addicts, which is too bad. In Missoula, we're lucky we have a Carol Graham home, which is for women who have children. They live together in the residential treatment facility. Many of them are meth addicts. The treatment of methamphetamine is very difficult. Relapse rates are high, but it doesn't mean that women in particular can't be successfully treated for methamphetamine. They can. What we know actually is, and this is very difficult when you think about it, you're telling an individual woman, hopefully she can have her child with her, oftentimes not, that the first 6 months of treatment are going to be very difficult, and what we also know is that it's going to get worse before it gets better. So we actually have some fairly interesting data that shows us that the 6th, 7th, and 8th month of a woman in recovery from treatment, this is women specific, that they actually regress back to the same process they entered treatment with, meaning they, in 6 months into the recovery of the brain, they begin to continue having sleep disturbance, they will begin to have some confusion about memory, they will begin to feel some anxiety and some depression. And that's 6 months after being clean and sober. So what we know then, therefore, is that methamphetamine treatment takes years. We suggest the optimal treatment time be at least 2 years, by the way, with some form of supervision and support and treatment. That we have to work very closely with women and their children in helping her develop some new skills, helping her, if you will, heal her brain, go through a whole process of very complex steps in treatment. So as you understand treatment and the complexity of treatment, for me it even motivates me more about prevention. It's a horrific drug. It's highly addictive. Treatment is very difficult. We don't have enough resources in this state. So the other way to manage this is by putting up this huge detour sign, which I believe our campaign is doing, and saying, don't go down that path. We know kids are going to make mistakes. had made mistakes. I'll continue to make mistakes. What we're saying to them is, don't make this mistake. This is a bad mistake. One, in fact, that in the world of drug usage is probably the worst. And in this state, as we educate parents, communities, and kids, I believe that we can significantly reduce our lifetime use. According to our school-based surveys, about 9.5% of our high schoolers tell us that they've used methamphetamine in their lifetime. We should compare it to the national average of less than 5%. So let's just round it up to 10%. We should be able to reduce that significantly, and I would say we can reduce it to about 2% of our kids. Similar to our heroin usage rates. Our heroin usage rates in this state are relatively low compared to inner city New York, Chicago, the bigger cities. And if you think about it, we ask why. You ask a kid, so tell me, what is heroin? They go, heroin, that's crap, that's horrible, that's awful. Why? For 2 decades, what have we seen in movies? What have we seen on televisions? What have we seen in books? The heroin's a bad drug. But we need to do the same thing about methamphetamine. We need to create an environment in this state where the majority of our kids say, that's a bad drug. Even if it gets to their alcohol party, which it will, or their marijuana use party, which it will, I hate to say. We want kids to be able to have a knee-jerk reaction to say, that's a bad drug, I don't want to use it, get it out of here. And we want kids to be able to say that to one another and to their peers and to their friends. And that's what this campaign is about. We know we have a problem with underage drinking. We know we have a problem with underage marijuana use. We're not saying that isn't problematic, significant, but we also are saying we need to drive down the methamphetamine lifetime usage in our teenagers, and I'd suggest in our women in particular in this state, and we can do that by increasing the knowledge and information about methamphetamine.
Why does it hit the rural areas?
First, it was easier to manufacture until our state passed a law. By the way, about 25 states have passed a similar law in which they put the precursor drug behind the counter. So it was easier to manufacture. In fact, you needed to have an area that had a lot of space because the process of making methamphetamine has a horrible order. And so you would be able to know something's going on. And so if you think about a city, it's harder to do that when people are all around. And then it's a movable lab, so they're able to move things around. So I think once they understood the manufacturing benefits of being in rural areas, it hit rural states. Then we got into people wanting it because it was such a wonderful drug. So now, even though it's not manufactured here, it's still transported here. It's considered a poor man's cocaine. It's usually cheaper than cocaine. It's a longer lasting high than cocaine. It's a more powerful drug than cocaine. So once it's there, you have to reduce demand because the supply will be there because it's about making money. I mean, that's in part why. And no one really knows other than that's one theory. Great.
Thanks to Peg Shea for sharing her time with us.
We have, within the community of Missoula, a nonprofit organization called Living Art. And we have an ongoing opportunity in a whole variety of ways to be able to celebrate life with living art.
Good morning. My name is Yupa Stein, and I'm the director of Living Art. And Living Art helps people facing illness and loss through the use of the arts and nature-based experiences. So that includes both people who might be facing a particular illness or condition that has altered their life in some way, and also healthcare providers. And we believe that the arts and our relationship to the natural world are essential to our wellness. And the arts and nature help us in a number of ways, and they help us see things in new ways, they help us access our strengths, and they help us connect with and deepen our relationship to ourselves and to others. And I thank St. Patrick Hospital and Women's Health for inviting us to share a few things with you today. This morning, I have the honor of introducing Sheila Weishauer, and in 2004, Living Art started a once-a-month drop-in poetry workshop, and Sheila was a very committed participant. And she is a mother of 3 and a naturally gifted poet. So please welcome Sheila.
Good morning. Are you hearing me all right? Okay. I'm very excited to speak to you about living art and my experience with the healing power of writing through poetry. Entering my first workshop, the air crackled with nervousness. When we wrote, many of us automatically would say, "I'm sure this isn't right," or "This isn't really a poem," but before we read. We joked that reading our poetry aloud was like taking our clothes off. Apologizing seemed to be standard for a time and was gracefully accepted by our dynamic co-facilitators, Beth Ferris and Judith Johnson, as part of our process until we ourselves came to realize that it wasn't necessary. Beth began each session with a meditation. Before doing so, she would say, "If you hurt, please sit in a soft chair or lie on a pillow." My experiences in life have led me down many roads, most of them the ones requiring a smile and chin up, no matter how I was feeling. Here in this time and space, it was okay not to drop my pain at the door and pick it up on the way out. This was a huge burden lifted, and the writing hadn't even begun. I'd like to share with you a poem I've written about the writing process. I've been visiting pages of my past at a time perhaps less broken than before, when the trees offered me only their patience. One day I wrote my pain a gateway into the blues and greens, and found ease and rest where the arbor watches over the garden, and the birch meets the skyline, the porthole where the dying see what the living cannot. I've sat looking out this window for a year learning how to write. The trees transform into whatever I need them to be. Today, their leaves are prayer flags, waving to remind me how easy it is to attach my pain to them and send it off into the breeze. It was hard before it was easy. I tell my pain because of you, I am stronger. Compassion finds us good company. Now we sat beside a river of poetry and say that we help each other. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Beth Shank. I am facilitator of Women's Health at St. Patrick Hospital. On February 15th, 2007, Deb Sybrand, physician's assistant in cardiology at the International Heart Institute of Montana, will be discussing women's heart health. On March 15th, 2007, Dr. Judy Vischer, a family practice physician at the Western Montana Clinic, will discuss weight management. To attend these lectures in person, please feel free to come down to St. Patrick Hospital to the Broadway building on the third Thursday of each month until May of 2007 from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m.